Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Maggie Bot, and today we are doing a Hangout number 2 about offensiveness in gaming and um, how political correct speech and how purposefully hurtful language can affect us in gaming. I have with me today Andrew from Gameosity, and we will at some point have Erin from Cardboard Republic, which I'm super excited about. I am really thrilled to have everybody here. I want to take a couple minutes just to say, so ground rules in my chat are going to be that we are careful about everybody's feelings, including those who maybe don't agree with us all the time. And so I don't want big sweeping generalizations. I really don't want to hear about those people. The assumption coming into our discussion today is that we are one gaming community and one hobby, and that everything we do is going to be reflected upon all of us. So I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable to have some opinions here, as long as they are careful about other people's feelings. That being said, that's kind of the basis of our talk anyway, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. Good morning, Andrew. How are you doing?
Good morning, Maggie. I'm good.
Great. So can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and who you are and all that?
Okay. Well, my name's Andrew, and I'm a lifelong gamer. I started with, the original NES when I was 6, and I've been basically playing games ever since. I started in pen and paper role playing when I was in college, and a couple years ago, I started the board game thing, and that has rapidly mushroomed into a huge part of my life. And we started Gameosity, myself, my wife Jessica, and a couple of our friends, so that we could continue to kind of explore and expand on this passion of ours.
That's really fantastic. And so you've been doing Gameosity for a couple of years then?
Uh, for a couple years now. We went live, I think, 2 years ago.
Oh, that's exciting. So, just I definitely know that feeling where you just like you fall into hobby and you just want to talk to people about it, and you want to find like the best way to do so. So for some of us, that is about making content and those types of things. We will be expecting my friend Erin here from Cardboard Republic. She's having a little camera trouble, so
Oh,
she'll just be popping in when she can. I look forward to talking with her as well. I am getting ready for Gen Con here in a couple of days. I'm super excited about that. But in the last couple of days, there was an unfortunate number of Kickstarters coming out that are utilizing we're just gonna call it the Cards Against Humanity model of building offensiveness and strong language and diverse ideas into a game to titillate and hopefully get sales. And there was one recently that was a Christian, a black, a Jew, and a gay walk into a bar, and that was the premise for their game. And it was about stereotypes. It was made by 2 white gentlemen, and so that kind of it blew up my mentions for about 3 hours the other day. So I figured we could talk a little bit about why that's effective and how that's effective and how we might be able to combat that as a hobby. So what was your first impression of that campaign? I mean, it's a $20,000 goal, and so I don't find it to be that threatening. I think it might not fun, but I do think that it's interesting to see how they did it.
Yeah, my initial impression is just like anything built around a degree of shock value. It was designed to look like it was misbehaving intentionally. Looked at the game's mechanics; they're virtually non-existent, and so it's pretty clear that these guys, they want to sell a product, and they think that there's a niche that they can fill, and so that's what they're doing.
I agree with that entirely. I'd like to introduce also Erin is here from Cardboard Republic. Hi, Erin.
Hey, can you hear me all set?
Yeah.
Awesome, perfect.
How are you doing?
Good. So I also had problems with Chrome not working the way I wanted it to.
Well,
But it's
I'm glad
cool.
you're here anyway. I'm glad Brian did some
Oh yeah.
wizardry.
So this is probably not the best way to introduce myself to like a diversity and inclusivity way, but when I started dating him and moved in with him, I sort of stopped like learning about technology because it was redundant knowledge. He was already like way better at it.
That's because you're resourceful. It is
Right, right. So we like to min-max our relationship. So like he does all of the tech stuff.
right, and then you're here to talk. Like I
Right,
totally
exactly.
We don't see Ryan on camera right now, do we?
No, I made him leave the room because I can't talk when he's just standing there. He'll just start jumping in.
Okay. Before we get too deep into the topic, Erin, will you give us a little rundown of Cardboard Republic for all the people? 'Cause I don't
Yeah,
think I did a great job with it.
absolutely. No. So we are a gaming review site mostly. We do a podcast and we do videos now and Instagram, all sorts of stuff. And we try to focus on doing more in-depth coverage of games. And we do come at it from a perspective of focusing on diversity and inclusivity. That's really important to us. And also highlighting a lot of indie creators. So we love the latest, like, big, huge, hot title, but I personally love dealing with like indie designers so much.
It's a different experience talking with someone that maybe has made one game or publishes themselves rather than the people who it's their day job to design. Like it just is an inherently different experience.
You get so excited, like it's their baby, and they just want to tell you all about it, and oh, it's adorable. I love them.
I totally agree with that. How's your week going with Kickstarter?
For better or worse, I've been so busy lately with Gen Con prep and school stuff and life stuff that like I haven't had a chance to really engage in a lot of gaming media, which is good because mostly gaming media has been a nightmare. But there's been some good stuff too, I'm sure.
So, Erin, what's your initial reaction when games like Cards Against Humanity or whatever not safe for work game, when they use that type of language and that type of tactic to get sales? Like, how does that affect you?
So that's changed a lot over the years. When Cards Against Humanity first came out, I think I was still in college or thereabouts, and I thought it was funny. I liked it. It was outrageous, and there was a lot of shock value to it. But as time has gone on and I've made a wider range of friends and just sort of educated myself more in general, I'm less okay with it. I'm less comfortable with it. That's been my own personal journey with those games. So right now, I don't really play them. I kind of ignore them. I pretend they're not there for the most part. I don't necessarily care if like my friends own them. I have friends who love them, and we've talked about it, but they're not really going to bring them over to my house. I'm not really going to go to their house and play them. That's kind of how I stand on it right now. I don't know. I mean, I have opinions on whether or not companies should use that. Obviously, I don't really think that that's a great thing to bring people into our community with. But on the other hand, I try to more encourage people to like vote with your money. Like, don't support that if it's something that you personally can't get behind.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think we all had some similar things to that. I actually played 2 games of Cards Against Humanity at one point. I played them with friends. I didn't say anything that I would be ashamed to say on camera right now, like with my card. But the opportunity was there to do that, and so I think that's where my line is like I did at one point. I have played that game before. I played it 2 different things, and I guess I would stand up and tell you guys what my choices were with my white cards, but I wasn't super thrilled of what choices I did have. That's where I'm at. Andrew, did you play when cards first came out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I mean, I was a fan for a good long time. A little bit like what you were just saying, Erin. It's a game that, from my group, we leaned into the absurdity of it rather than the offensiveness of it. We kind of like what you just said, Maggie. It wasn't a matter of being able to say these risque things, but rather my group, my friends, we tended to find the ridiculous funny, and so it was hyperbolic and over the top, and that's why we enjoyed it. And one of the things about Cards Against Humanity as a phenomena for us is what really makes an impact for me is how quickly the drop-off is in how entertaining it stays. And that's very telling as far as its value as a game.
And we won't get into this debate. I consider it a game. I don't consider it an activity or whatever. A lot of people have this weird distinction in their head of whether or not it is a game anyway. So, Cards did one thing I actually really respect about the Cards Against Humanity folks is that largely once their game blew up beyond absurdity, like just went bananas, they used a lot of that then to turn around and support charitable causes. So it's hard for me to like completely vilify them as humans. However, their impact on our industry, what we do, and the games that are coming out to this day means that every Joe Schmo that wants to make a game now can slap some dirty words on some cards and have a better chance now of making their game fun through Kickstarter or sell in a store than they would have before. So ultimately, I find that Cards Against Humanity had kind of a negative effect overall. It's hard because I know that they've given a lot to charity, so you can't really fault them for that. They sold poo to people and then took that money and gave it to amazing causes.
Like, that almost makes it more difficult, though, because you can't really get that mad at them. And I mean, that's, I find, kind of what happens in real life, too, when people say something awful, and you're like, well, they just said this really awful thing, but it's my cousin, and I love them, and they do all these other good things, too. So I guess people aren't, like, you know, one or the other. It's complicated. God.
You know, the thing is, though, that for what makes Cards Against Humanity unique is that they have a very self-aware attitude about what they do and what they create, whereas I find a lot of the sort of spawn of Cards Against Humanity to be way more tone deaf, way less aware
I
of what it
extremely
itself
agree with
is.
that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday, this is talk 2 of my weekend because I decided to do 2 hangouts. And yesterday we brought up, there's a game called Crabs Adjust Humidity, and it was a Cards Against Humanity supplement done by a different company, but it had the okay for cards. So in their base set, in Volume 1, they had a card that was a literal rape joke just on the card. They got some backlash about it, so they said they were going to take it out. So they took it out of their second version of the game, and then they put it into the 5th volume of a 6-volume set. So
Yeah, because they're out of ideas, maybe?
I just, like, but that kind of tone deaf, which we should define here on the stream a little bit, that to me says that they heard the backlash, they heard some ideas about what they had put into their game, and then they decided that it was worth their brand, that was worth their time to then recreate that somewhere else inside their game. And putting it into a 5th of 6 volumes, to me, says that they're just hoping to rope you in to buy the first one and the second one and be okay with it. And by the time you get to the 5th one, apparently you're so numb to that type of offensive language that you won't even care anymore.
It maybe it's as simple as literally just needing content to fill a box of cards. Not that that's an excuse. In fact, that's almost the worst reason to do something like that. But it certainly doesn't speak to sensitivity versus creativity. That's not a dichotomy. You know, they needed another card, and somebody at the corporate office thinks that rape joke was hilarious, and so in it went.
Somebody just really wanted that rape joke. Adam actually brings up a really good point, and Eric or Lackey in the chat, I see a lot of what you've been saying, and it's really, really good, and I'm going to get back to it. But Adam brings up a point of these not safe for work kind of Kickstarter funding thingies. They don't strike me as the same type of game as something like the first-time design from an indie publisher, these not safe for work card games and these like offensive card games are there to make money, which is really odd in our hobby. I know that sounds really weird because it is a commercial enterprise, but it's so rare for indie games to be about the money instead of about the game. And
Right.
I feel that might actually be a huge distinction. I hadn't actually put it in that term before. It's very rare that you're going to make money on a Euro game. It's very rare that you're going to make money on any game, except when you make it an Apples or a Cards clone now and slap some dirty words on it.
I mean, I wonder if they are still making that much money, though, because Cards did it and Apples to Apples did it, but they were the first, and so all these clones are seeing that, oh, well, they did it. I can do that too. But is there really still a high demand for that kind of game?
A lot of these games get funded. That's the thing that's aggravating.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, and from a retail perspective, when things like Slash come to retail, or Crowds Adjust Humidity, or any of these other not safe for work clones, the Telestrations After Dark, like, consistently sells better than any given Euro in my store. So they are making money.
Yeah.
But it's surprising to me. You wouldn't think that those would get beyond their kind of one-line joke, because it is all just like one bad joke after another, right? But they do somehow make it, and they appeal to a different audience than those of us who go searching after that import Euro that we've never found before or whatever. It is a very different segment of society that they're trying to reach, and they are reaching it.
I think what you're saying is about demographic is really important, because if you're gonna buy, we reviewed a game on Gameosity. It was the first like truly negative review that we ever felt we had to post up. There's this game called Never Have I Ever, and it had in it, again, it was one of these like not safe for work party style card games. It had like 300 5-star ratings on Amazon, and so we got our hands on it and we looked at it, and halfway through our first play session I got halfway through the rules and flipped over 3 very literal rape jokes in a row, and it was just like, oh, well, okay, this is super not cool. What was clear is that this game was not made for somebody who seeks out board games. This was about getting a room full of drunk people laughing. It was very lowest common denominator style humor. That game in particular was really frustrating because it vacillated wildly between incredibly offensive and incredibly not funny in a very benign, vanilla, flavorless way. But we should think about who these games are being made for when we're trying to figure out how to analyze them, you know?
I totally agree with that. And so one thing we hit on a little bit yesterday, when that Kickstarter came out, I was pretty offended, and I kind of took to Twitter to rant a little bit. And I was like, oh my god, our hobby, what are we doing? We could be better than this. And a lot of people were saying, what do you mean we? No, that's them. That's outside us. We are better than that. And I believe that if you are introduced to our hobby by a game with blatant offensive tones or rape jokes or whatever you want, that is representative of what I do, no matter if I play that game or not. So I fully believe that we need to kind of take those on as part of our hobby and deal with them internally. I feel like as soon as we say, oh, not my problem, I'm not going to play that game, we are ignoring the fact that that's the invitation to the hobby that a lot of people are going to receive, because those games are built for people getting drunk at a bar and people that haven't heard of other games, and the demographic is at new gamers. It's at new people outside the hobby. And if that's really the introduction they're getting, especially as they learn a little bit more about the world, like all of us kind of recognize that we at some point were like, oh, okay, we'll play this Cards Against Humanity thing, and then later realized how awful we were, like, sounding and speaking and using our actions. So Okay, Zen. But I think that there's something to be said about making sure that the folks that are running the Kickstarter I was offended by the other day, I wouldn't approach them. Their entire platform was about we don't care that we're being offensive. I'm actually not sure what to do at that point. Like if your platform is about not it is about offending me and not caring about my feelings, I don't know how to get beyond that. But they are representing my hobby, which I care deeply about. Do you have any ideas of how we might begin that conversation with them?
I mean, from the perspective of just psychology and everything, I honestly am not sure that we are the best people to be starting that conversation with them, because those conversations are so much more effective when they come from someone who that person considers part of their in-group already. And I don't think that's going to be anyone who's talking on this Hangout right now, just for one reason or another, just because we're here, because this is something we're concerned about. In order for that message to get across to them, it would need to be one of their friends or family members or something being like, hey, I understand that you are doing this to be offensive. Totally get that. Here's why I don't like it. For us, though, I don't know.
Right, like how do we in the hobby say, hi, people outside what I would normally consider my hobby, here's what you're introducing, and here's why we don't want that. We don't want to crush your spirits, but we would like to crush your attempts at a really lazy and awful game.
I think the reality, it's okay. So this is obviously super multifaceted, but um, eh, looking at that particular game on Kickstarter right now, it is not a game in an interesting or engaging way. So from the of a game design that can add value even when something in a game is offensive, this doesn't have that going for it. Talk about Secret Hitler or the slave cards in Five Tribes. Both those games have a degree of validity as game design that, to me, to varying degrees, offsets the part that could be considered offensive. Whereas this is just like, let's ask racially uncomfortable questions under the guise of opening a dialogue about race, which is total nonsense. I mean, that's what their Kickstarter premise is. We're gonna bring people together by making white people explain why they would or would not marry a black person in the context of a card game. The people who design these kinds of games, I don't think are confused or unaware on a certain level. Most of them, as you said, this is profit driven. They want to make money and they see a niche. And on some level, there's a little bit of I'm reading into it obviously, but my interpretation is when somebody complains about political correctness, what they're really trying to say is that they don't want to feel put upon themselves. And I should be free to express myself. And the fact that you're offended, I don't want to have to compensate. I don't want to have to change the way I think, speak. Come on, you know how I mean it. I'm just kidding. And they feel confronted, perhaps, or insulted that someone would call into question their own decency. And so this is kind of an overcorrection and a backlash to that, I think.
Yeah, the second that people are talking about political correctness, I often, especially for people that I like, people I respect or have some sort of connection to, I know that that's not coming from a place that they wanted to actually offend someone. I know that that's coming from a place where they don't understand that they might have privileges and rights that others don't, and that when they use speech that offends other people, that's generally from a different place, and it's coming with a whole lot of context around it that they don't know about. I feel like every time someone says that things are too PC these days, it is not because they are trying to offend others with their speech. It's because they don't want to feel bad when they do offend others. And I get that in a certain way, but I mean, you either lean in and you try and correct those things, or you lean back and you try and make sure everyone else corrects themselves around you. And you can say whatever you like, and it's not offensive because you didn't mean anything by it.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the reality is that I don't get to decide whether you're offended by something I've said. All I get to decide is how much I care about whether I've hurt you or not. And Five Tribes to me is a great example of this, because they put out this game and it has this one component, these slave cards, that plenty of people, at least here in the States, found offensive. You know, obviously, I can only speak from perspective of where I'm from and who I am, but I found those cards pretty troubling, and my group also found them pretty offensive. And there was a backlash in the community against the people calling for a change, because, hey, suck it up, it's the artist's vision, it's the designer's choice, all that. And then they blinked. They heard the criticism, they released a second edition that didn't have the slaves, and they even made the replacement cards available, so if you didn't want to buy a brand new game but you found the slave cards offensive, you didn't have to have them anymore. And so there was a company, to me, you know, the misstep is whatever. The way you handle it matters, because that indicates your empathy, your humanity, and maybe your business sense, right? Because you don't want to upset your customers. But there are still people who are mad that those folks were forced to change their vision. And so there's this like sanctity of self that is valuable when it's protecting you, but at a certain point you're protecting your ego at the expense of everyone around you, and that low empathy just has no place in a modern dialogue.
I totally agree, and I when people when they switched from slaves to fakirs, and the slave cards, I personally, uh, I was sad about having to use these slaves to do these things. I wasn't technically offended in that way. I actually wouldn't have asked them to change it. But when they changed it from slaves to fakirs, I was, oh, great, cool, because that's going to help more people enjoy this game. And for some reason, there was a backlash about that change. And I think you've hit it really well on the head. Like, people didn't want these folks to have to force to change their vision, like their game. They really wanted those slave cards in there. Where I think the actual game makers didn't really care and were happy to slap a different name on there, because the last thing they wanted to do is make people have to think about slaves and slavery and those types of things while they're playing this pretty light game by a pretty family-oriented design team, right? Like, Days of Wonder is not a design team that's supposed to make you like super think and reflect upon your life and talk about slavery. Like, they want you to play Small World. They want you to play Ticket to Ride. So I think it was a great choice for them to go to Fakirs. But maybe that's my perspective, and so I'm sorry, Erin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one thing you touched upon at the beginning is really important for this conversation, too, and that's that you don't necessarily have to be personally offended in order to say, hey, I don't think this is the way I want the hobby to be. Like, I mean, I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker, I don't get, like, personally offended by a whole lot anymore, because I hear a lot and I see a lot, and you get a little desensitized. So that doesn't mean I can't look at a game like Five Tribes and be like, this is probably not okay. This is going to hurt someone's feelings or make them think about things they don't want to think about, and maybe we should consider changing it. It doesn't always have to come from a place of deep personal outrage in order for you to say something, and I think that gets lost a lot in this conversation.
I would agree. Beth had a really great point. I'm trying to find it here. So one thing Beth brought up in the chat, and the chat is really great, you guys. You're on it today. I'm having a lot of trouble keeping up with it all, but it's amazing. Beth mentioned that not safe for work and kind of more adult themes, especially when you're shopping through like a Target or a Walmart or like somewhere that's not hobby, that's a little bit more like for everybody. If it says not safe for work or it says adult, you're going to feel like you're not doing something as childish, especially if you're not in the hobby. A lot of people, if I'm carrying around a bag of games on a bus, I have definitely been asked, oh, cool, are you bringing those home to your kids? And, I mean, they don't know that they're looking at Kanban and some euros, and, like, they don't know what that is, but they associate these board games with children and childhood and those types of things. So the second you say not safe for work, that tells people that it's built for them as adults, and they're more comfortable in trying it. I think that is a really, really valid point in that will invite people to try something they might not have because they didn't want to be seen as immature or childish. But they'll try something not safe for work. Yeah, they open that meme, they see that thing. And so the board game with that moniker on it might actually help get people past what they think is going to be an immature experience or a childish experience. I don't know that I love that always means like highly sexualized themes and generally heteronormative, but that's my own flag to wave over here. Have you had trouble with people that are not necessarily gamers in your life assuming that the games you're playing should be built for children?
Like every day?
Yeah.
No, like every day. No, I mean all the time. I think that's just part of it. I just did a presentation in one of my classes on board games and how I use board games as self-care. And I basically had to do a 5-minute intro to like the history of board games and what I'm talking about when I say a board game. Because for so many people, they play them in childhood, and that's awesome, and then they stop playing them, and so they consistently associate them with childhood. It's normal. I don't think I mean, obviously I fight against that, but it's not, it is what it is.
I gave up on being embarrassed about being a gamer a really long time ago. I use the fact that I still, to this day, play and run Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like that, almost as a I use it as a like a barometer in social situations. I don't hold that information back, and I like gauging people's responses to that statement because it tells me a lot about what I can share with you right off the bat. But I find that in my personal sphere, a lot of people, when I tell them, oh, I play board games, I review board games online for my website, there's a curiosity there. And I think what I have that is kind of a strange thing is that I mean, many spend an irresponsible amount of money on board games. So when somebody says, "Oh, you play board games," and I said, "Yeah, my collection's about 300-400 games," that immediately tells them that there's something. I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but that it's not just this pile of childhood favorites that they probably are familiar with, and it gets them asking questions, not the least of which being, why?
Do you need help? Are you okay?
Exactly.
So I think that's an important point, and I probably wouldn't have thought about that on my own. I have built my own little personal bubble of gamers, and I don't really interact outside of that very often. My work and my personal life is all games, so I forget sometimes that people have family and stuff. I don't know, but well, every once in a while when someone like looks down at my game bag and asks if I'm going home to the kids, I get really confused. I'm like, wait, what do you oh, board. I gotcha. But I feeling a little bit bad. My friend Zen is in the chat, and I don't feel his perspective is being represented very well. So I'm hoping at some point to have a conversation with him, and I will release it as maybe a blog or something, Zen, because that's what I desperately wanted, was to make sure that we could have a conversation about all of the parts of this, not necessarily just things that I agreed with. because I know that I'm more on the liberal tip of this. I also find offensive themes to very quickly be more offensive if they have to do with sex than with violence or even slavery or colonialism, um, especially in an American sense. So this is day 2, and I unfortunately only had Americans on my chats here, but I find things like cash and guns and other very, very hyper-violent themes to be somewhat offensive to me, and I don't see that a lot online. Do you guys ever have trouble with that line? Like, especially as a sex-positive person, like, it bugs me when only sex is the problem.
Well, speaking as, a heterosexual, cisgendered, Caucasian, middle class, male,
All the check boxes. Nice.
yeah, I'm, the ruling class, unfortunately. Um, there's absolutely a persistent sense in American media. I mean, this you could write dissertations on this, and certainly many have been written, that American media tends to be intensely comfortable with sexuality, and all you have to do is watch every slasher flick ever made where young people engage in illicit behavior, sex, drugs, occasionally rock and roll, and then are murdered by an elemental evil for the crime of getting laid. It's a super deep cultural go-to. And some of the games that you talk about, Maggie, were like Cash and Guns, where you say, oh, that's a hyper-violent game. It tells me a lot about my own perspective, because I don't find it violent at all. I don't even see it. I don't even notice the violence in that game.
Now that you're thinking about it and you're pointing guns at your best friends, does that ever, is that hitting you at all? Like, gun in
Only
their
if
face?
only if I use a bang card and not a click card. But
Okay.
exactly. But it's really orders of magnitude. It comes from this very personal place. Of course, violence is a problem. It's ridiculous to say that it isn't. Um, I guess I don't find it troubling in the same way, only because of exposure, only because of the insensitivity that has been programmed into me from 34 years of American media.
That's interesting, because Cash and Guns is also a game that I won't play. It makes me really uncomfortable, for a couple of reasons. One is that I just don't like party games really that much, and so there's that, just from a mechanical standpoint. Right, that's a whole other conversation. But also, like, I don't like the idea of sitting there and pointing guns at people and having guns pointed at me. But violence in the form of colonialism in games, or I don't know, more abstract isn't necessarily the best word, but, a little more removed, doesn't bother me as much on a visceral level. I can look at it and intellectually say, I don't agree with the way they're doing this, but it doesn't make me as uncomfortable, like, in my physical body as, like, something like Cash and Guns does.
Well, and I think everyone's gonna have their own lines. My big thematic game that I don't play, even though I literally almost don't care about theme in most games, like, it's a 90% of the time type of thing. Archipelago was the worst of them for me, and it was just the colonialism and white savior knight on a shining horse type of theme really, really bothered me in that one particular game, and I think everyone's going to have their own line of what bothers them. Cash and Guns, I definitely had played once, and then I kind of, once I was done with it, because it's Munchkin-y type art, it's cartoony and, like, silly looking, but when I was done with it, I was like, You know what I just did? I just, like, literally held up a foam gun and pointed it at a good friend of mine. Like, that just feels like not what I want to be doing with my hobby. But that game is completely innocuous in most game stores. You will find it. No one has taken that game out because of its theme. The big one for me, Tanto Cuore, that came out a couple of years back, was a more anime theme, and it was about maids and a master and trying to create love in the household, and it was basically Dominion with some neat twists to it. But I found more people offended by Tanto Cuore than they were offended by something like Cash and Guns. That kind of hyper anime sexuality really seems to get, especially in the American sense, it gets under people's skin, and it's really interesting to me to see how that works.
I think part of what you're seeing is the difference between the call for recently certainly a push for inclusivity and representation in games that is not exactly the same as political correctness. I think the two get conflated a lot, and they're not the same. A good friend of mine makes an interesting point, and I agree with her, but then again, I read you my list of qualifications for why I may not be the person to have this conversation. What she says is it's not about taking away options, it's about giving more options, and that's what inclusivity means to her, and it's what it has come to mean to me. And that is a very different topic than things that are offensive and things that can cause harm emotionally. At least I see a divide between the two. I'm looking at this Kickstarter page, and for a Jew, a black, a Christian, and a gay walk into a bar, and the fact that that name of that game is itself cringy has way more to do with how it's willing to cause social discomfort, and then in fact it leans into it. That has way more to do with that political correctness and that empathy question than it does whether it's inclusive, although the two are clearly connected to each other, because theoretically anybody should be able to play this stupid offensive game and have the same experience. But it's that's clearly not what they're going for. When it comes to violence, though, you're touching on very different feelings, and it's interesting to me, fascinating to me, that that there are folks who find some of these games, like Cash and Guns, deeply troubling. When to me, it's invisible. It just means nothing. And I realize that maybe in saying that I sound awful, but it's just the difference in the balance of our perspectives.
Well, but it's not necessarily whether or not you're personally offended, but
Sure.
It's your reaction when you find out someone else is offended, I guess.
Absolutely.
Is a little more
Absolutely.
important to me. Zen is in the chat, and I really wish he would come on the theme on the Hangout here, because I want to value this perspective. But for me, someone changing their theme or changing a game to kind of be okay with more people more often. So if your theme is the thing that's going to prevent people from playing a game or doing a thing, and then you reskin it or redo it to make it more palatable for more people, I don't consider that to be censorship. I consider censorship to be like, you can't pitch a game to Asmodee unless it is within the following themes. Or censorship to me says that someone in power says that something else is not okay, whether or not it has any value. And so I would consider like a reskin of Two Rooms and a Boom, which is what was coming up in the chat, to be perfectly fine. If they could find a way to make that big old group game still deduction-y and fun and murder mystery, but maybe not as offensive because it uses a terrorist and a president and that kind of thing. If they want to reskin that as throwing a birthday party or whatever else it is, I would be more than okay with that. Because I think if it makes it more palatable to more people, sometimes that can be okay. And the purpose of that game is not to have a serious discussion about terrorism and presidencies, and the purpose of that game was not to start a conversation. I think that to me is maybe the difference, is like the intent of the game was maybe not to have a serious discussion, but it was just a theme that they used because it's easy to describe. Censorship to me is another term that I feel kind of goes into the politically correct box, where I don't know that everyone uses it the same way, so I try not to use it.
And no, I mean, when you talk about your example, for instance, to me, doesn't even sound like censorship. If I'm Asmodee and I say, you can't pitch me a game unless it will qualify, to these 5 criteria, I'm a company. I'm a private organization. I can do that if that's what I want. Censorship is when someone with an authoritarian choice not authoritarian position, gets to tell you that you simply can't create, state, all of those things.
I would agree with that, but I specifically used Asmodee because they own 60% of the market share right now.
Absolutely, and that's a whole other bag of cats.
But if they came out with a standards list of themes and things that were okay or not, I would consider that censorship at this point.
I think this is an example, though, of how everyone does use it differently, and so it is a really tricky term, because I think by the literal definition, yeah, censorship is only going to be, the government or some other incredibly powerful outside source, but then, Maggie, the way you're defining it, Asmodee, in this case, is that incredibly powerful outside source, so it's complicated.
As the whole thing is, and why we are trying to be as inclusive in this chat as we can be, because it is an incredibly odd topic, and the last thing we want to do is just speak to people that agree with us all the time. And I find it incredibly important to speak with all types of people, hopefully who are there to have discussion, but that's on them. So, how are y'all feeling about how do we reach people that have not made up their minds about whether things are offensive or not, and how to deal with that? How do you have that conversation with people the first time when they feel like they offended someone they didn't mean to, they're feeling bad, they just kind of want the whole thing to go away, they don't want to talk about it anymore? Like, how do you approach folks and have that conversation without making everyone in the room feel like they're a horrible person?
Ooh, that's tricky. I think the fastest way to make things like that go away, to smooth it over, is to think about what, in this case, like, I say something that offends you, Maggie, and you say, oh, that offends me. And I think about it and go, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm sorry about that. And then we're cool. We're probably cool after that, I think so much of what happens is our egos getting in the way, like we mentioned before, and us wanting to protect what we've said at the expense of everything else.
It's so common for, I'm completely guilty of this myself, and controlling that reflex has been something I've worked on as a person. But that moment where you realize that you've created a reaction in someone that perhaps you didn't intend, and under the best of circumstances, you didn't intend. If you're trying to get it out of somebody, that's a whole other conversation. And if your attitude is you shouldn't be offended because it's true, that's a whole other conversation. But in this regard, if I say something or do something that causes offense and somebody communicates it to me, it's on me to decide how I want to react to that and how much I want to care about your feelings as opposed to my own. And so often what you say, Erin, is 100% true. that flares to life, and it says, well, I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to be held accountable, and I certainly don't want to be the jerk in this circumstance, so I'm going to double down on the thing that has been offensive, and I'm going to defend this hill that I have arbitrarily stood on. And so for me, Maggie, the way that I try to sort of de-escalate those moments, both internally and with other people, sometimes I deal with young people as a hobby. I teach youth karate, and 8 to 18-year-olds are my range. And every now and again, I bump into something like this, where somebody says something that has offended somebody, either like misogyny or racism or something like that, which is crazy. But sometimes 16-year-olds say things that would put your jaw on the floor. And what I try to communicate to them is, wherever that statement came from, it's not inviolate. It is not. It doesn't have to define you. And if you are strong enough to stop and think about this other person who hopefully you value, and try to see something from their perspective, it doesn't even have to be in the moment you admitting guilt, only accepting that the person that you are talking to has been hurt by something that you've done or said. And if you've got it in you to not want that to be true, then the dialogue can continue. And hopefully that's those, you surround yourself with the kind of people who don't want to cause harm. Somebody who's just being a troll, well, I don't know. There's little that you can do to reach out to somebody who is evoking hurtfulness as a cudgel rather than accidentally.
That all just comes from a place of hurt or fear or somewhere else. That's an empathy thing. You just have to be like, well, at some point I hope to be able to actually have a conversation with you. I'm just going to leave that be for now. There's nothing you can do when people decide to be trolling. Like that term to me just speaks to, like, okay, I'm not actually having a conversation anymore. Like, there is an ulterior motive to this, and I am not part of it. So I'd like to ask the chat now to, if you have any last minute questions. I do want to keep this conversation somewhat short because it's so heavy, but I'd like to invite Erin first. Do you have anything else to say about the kind of weirdly forward offensive nature of some of these games, or anything to do with the topic, actually?
I did until you asked me. Okay.
I know.
So I think, Maggie, you and I have talked about this before, where, from a very progressive standpoint and a liberal standpoint, we tout empathy and empathy and empathy, and you need to understand people. And a lot of times, I'm not speaking necessarily with us, but just, in general, a lot of times that boils down to, you over there need to understand those people over there. Not I need to understand all of you. And so I think a lot of it, it's really corny, but it does start from within us and what we're putting out there, not in like a mystical universe sort of sense, but in the sense of, if we can try to have empathy for the people who are making something that we don't agree with, and you can't always. I'm not saying you should do this in a way that would hurt you, but if you can try to put yourself out there and see where they are in their own journey, sometimes that can help you build a bridge to them and get that conversation started. That's all.
Very apt. It goes all the way back to what we first talked about. Is like, it's not a them problem. It's an us problem. Like, if someone wants to be part of your hobby and you want to be part of that hobby too, you have to come to somewhat of an agreement upon what that looks like and what that sounds like and how you speak about it. And so when there are games that offend you outright, you maybe need to open dialogues. And maybe today is pushing me into writing an email to the gentleman that made that Kickstarter that started this conversation, but I don't know, because I know that the premise of their Kickstarter was anti what I believe, so I have trouble getting to that place.
No, I mean, in social work and everything, we talk a lot about meeting the client where they are. So you can't look at someone and just drag them kicking and screaming to your point of view or to where you think they should be. That's not always just as bad as what they're doing, because what they're doing is usually like really, really bad. But it's not great either. So when we can do that, and when we can do it in a way that doesn't like endanger ourselves emotionally, then I think it's valuable. But you also have to be careful. Like sometimes you do have to just say, you know what? These people are not going to listen. It's not worth my emotional energy and my worry and fear or anxiety to give them more of myself.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Andrew, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Well, like all cosmic and Zen, one of the biggest lies that I think we deal with is the separation between us. The idea that what hurts you doesn't somehow hurt me. And it all ties back to your stated position of empathy being sort of that first bulwark against the mistakes that we make and the hurts that we almost accidentally inflict on each other. It's important that as people who are in this hobby, we just keep standing on the right side of these issues. And, when someone doesn't understand why something might be offensive or troublesome, it's, to me, most of the time invitation for a dialogue. It's not always the most well-received dialogue, but the first step for me is to try and connect myself to the person who I've come into conflict with. And sometimes that's super hard even for me. Not saying even for me like I'm some amazing person, but in the moment when I'm upset, when I'm offended or hurt or just confused. I mean, even during the course of this conversation, I've got two people sitting here saying, I find this game particularly troublesome, and I look into myself and I'm like, I don't.
Nah.
What? No. But what is that? But the question is, what is that? What is that? What is the value of that difference between us? And there are times when it's totally okay to agree to disagree, and that's important too. But most important is to think in terms of, well, why does it hurt someone so bad, even if it doesn't hurt me? And that's where it all has to start. That's where it's all got to come from. These is the motive, and understanding what they are and where they come from, really important.
I really appreciate that, and the one part of this conversation, the one part of this channel and this chat that I really appreciate is that if it is an echo chamber of everyone agreeing that empathy is important, I am fully okay with that. Like, that is the one kind of echo chamber I am more than happy to propagate and hold up as really important. If everyone just cares a little bit more about what other people have to say, I am very okay with that. There is a little bit of a conversation here about Cards Against Humanity. It's a huge profit maker, and they only offered to sell to specific stores in the States. So there are about, I think, 7 or 8 stores that get direct sales of Cards Against Humanity. And there are also a couple of stores that buy those copies either from Amazon or from one of those big stores and then just sell it at a markup. I'm just seeing this whole chat, and I'm like, yeah, cards is a thing. It is, one of my stores sells code names as its number one, and one of them is Cards Against Humanity. And Codenames is absolutely fantastic, but then they went and did that Target exclusive, not safe for work edition, which is kind of awkward. I don't know if you guys have seen the cards yet, but super awkward.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen the cards yet, but I'm very curious.
And
that's how they'll get my $15
on the table. Like, would that make you feel awkward? Made me feel awkward.
Very little makes me feel awkward.
I'm gonna put you in the minority in our copy.
Yes. It's the only way I'm a minority.
Yay! That's fantastic. But I really appreciate you both being here. Would you take a couple minutes, just give me like a little bit of where to find you and where you are online, please? Andrew, you can start if you like.
Sure. I'm at Gamosity. Gamosity.com is our site. It's where we do all of our reviews. We've recently started doing a podcast. We've started doing video reviews, and we're trying to grow our content. We'd love more sort of community feedback on what they'd like to see too. So anything that you guys want to toss our way, we'd really appreciate.
Fantastic. And Erin, where can we find you in the million of places we can find you?
Oh my god, like everywhere. Ryan keeps just adding things.
I know.
So right now, cardboardrepublic.com is the main place. I am usually being yelled at on BGG about something or other, so you can find me there. I'm Senator M. On
Cool.
Twitter, I'm at super_E_Marie. That's the most of it. I mean, those are where I really am. You can find me in those places.
I mean, don't get me wrong. My wife Jess manages a Pinterest, an Instagram.
Right.
Yeah, I think we've got a MySpace page. I don't know.
I really appreciate you both for being here, and I appreciate the chat a lot today. If you felt there were things that we didn't address that you would like addressed, I would really appreciate anyone sending me messages either through Twitter or Facebook message, or email me at maggie@maggiebot.com, MAGGIBOT. I think I might write something up for an article here coming up in the next couple days. I am, of course, MaggieBot. You can find me here at my YouTube channel. You can find me on Twitter a lot, and you can find Meeples Included, which is my big website community thing, at meeplesincluded.com. I love you all, and I really appreciate you all for being here, and I will talk to you soon. Say bye. Bye.
Bye, guys.